On February 17, 1943, German forces captured the American supply depot near Feriana, Tunisia, during the opening phase of what would become the Battle of Kasserine Pass. What they found inside would fundamentally change how German commanders understood the war they were fighting. The depot was massive. Rows of wooden crates stretched across several acres, all stamped with American military markings. Inside those crates sat more food than an entire German division would receive in months. Fuel drums, ammunition cases, medical supplies, spare parts, and food. Mountains of food that German soldiers, hungry for months, tore through with desperate hands. Among the supplies were boxes labeled Field Ration Type K. Each box contained 3 separate meals: breakfast, dinner, and supper. Each meal came in its own compact package about the size of 2 cigarette packs. Inside the breakfast package was a small tin of chopped ham and eggs, already cooked and ready to eat, 4 hard biscuits, a compressed fruit bar, instant coffee, sugar tablets, cigarettes, chewing gum, and even toilet paper. This was emergency rations, the lowest quality field food the American military issued, and it was better than anything German soldiers had eaten in months. The K-ration provided 2,830 calories per day, total across all 3 meals, but these were just the emergency rations. The depot also contained Field Ration Type A, fresh vegetables and meat; Field Ration Type B, canned and preserved foods; Field Ration Type C, individual meal cans; mountains of real coffee, not the burnt grain ersatz the Germans drank; sugar by the ton; chocolate bars; canned fruit; condensed milk; and perhaps most absurdly to German eyes, ice cream mix. The Americans were shipping ice cream ingredients to North Africa in the middle of a war. Because they could. German officers conducting the inventory realized they were looking at a fundamental difference in capability. American soldiers in the field were eating a minimum of 2,800 calories per day from K-rations alone. In practice, when field kitchens were operational and other ration types available, American soldiers were consuming 3,400 to 4,100 calories daily, depending on their activity level and assignment. Official German rations at the start of the war called for approximately 3,600 calories per day on average, with combat troops receiving even higher allocations. However, actual delivery to troops in the field often fell short of these paper allocations. By early 1943 in North Africa, the reality was 1,500 to 1,800 calories on a good day, sometimes less. And those calories came from increasingly poor quality food. Black bread that was more sawdust than grain. Thin soup. Occasional canned meat of questionable origin. Ersatz coffee. When available, potatoes. The contrast was not just in quantity, it was in quality. American rations contained real meat, real eggs, real fruit, real coffee, real chocolate. German rations contained substitutes, fillers, whatever could be scraped together from a supply system stretched beyond breaking across multiple fronts. During the Kasserine Pass offensive from February 14th to February 24th, 1943, German forces captured substantial American material. The official tally included 183 tanks, 208 artillery pieces, 104 half-tracks, 512 trucks and vehicles, and critically, over 57,000 gallons of fuel and lubricants, plus 45 tons of ammunition. The food was not officially tallied, but German soldiers remembered it vividly for the rest of their lives. The disparity in rations was not new in early 1943. It had been building since the beginning of the war. When the Afrika Korps arrived in North Africa in February 1941, German logistics were already strained. Everything had to cross the Mediterranean from Italy, running a gauntlet of British naval and air attacks. Ships that made it to Tripoli or Benghazi then had to unload supplies onto a transportation network that barely existed. The Via Balbia, the single coastal road connecting Libya to Egypt, could not handle the volume. Trucks were in short supply. The distances were enormous. Fuel consumed getting supplies forward ate into the fuel being delivered. By late 1941, official Wehrmacht rations were not reaching troops at the front in full. Commanders stretched what they had. Rations meant for 10 men fed 12, then 15, then 20. Soldiers lost weight. Energy levels dropped. Illness increased. The desert environment, with its extreme heat and limited water, made everything worse. German military medical records from North Africa document the deterioration. Soldiers arriving in theatre typically weighed 160 to 180 pounds. After 6 months in theatre, soldiers showed significant weight loss. After a year, many had lost substantial body weight, with some documented cases exceeding 50 pounds. This was not from combat wounds, this was from chronic inadequate nutrition. The situation on the Eastern Front was even worse. Operation Barbarossa, launched in June 1941, was planned as a 3 to 4 month campaign. Destroy the Red Army, capture Moscow, force Soviet surrender before winter. The logistics were planned accordingly. Light, mobile, sufficient for a short campaign. It did not work that way. The Red Army did not collapse. Soviet forces traded space for time, falling back hundreds of miles while destroying infrastructure and supplies. German supply lines stretched across distances that German logistics simply could not support. Roads in the Soviet Union were primitive. Rain turned them to impassable mud. The rail system used a different gauge than German trains, requiring either conversion or transshipment. Trucks broke down from overuse and lack of spare parts. Horses, still the primary mover of German supplies, died by the thousands from overwork and lack of fodder. By November 1941, German armies were hundreds of miles inside Soviet territory with supply lines on the verge of collapse. Then the Russian winter arrived. Wehrmacht forces had winter clothing. It was sitting in warehouses in Germany. But there were not enough trains to transport it forward. Not enough trucks. Everything available was focused on moving ammunition and fuel. Food and clothing came second, sometimes third, sometimes not at all. German military records document the result. December 1941 saw temperatures drop to -30 degrees Celsius and below. German soldiers, many still wearing summer uniforms, froze. They also starved. With logistics collapsing, food deliveries became irregular. Units went a days with minimal rations. Hot meals became impossible when fuel for cooking was unavailable. Men ate frozen bread and whatever they could scavenge. The German High Command had ordered troops to live off the land in Soviet territories. This was official policy, part of the Hunger Plan, the deliberate starvation of Soviet populations to feed German forces. But Soviet scorched earth tactics and the poverty of rural Russia meant there was little to take. German soldiers found themselves competing with starving Soviet civilians and prisoners for scraps. The Wehrmacht took 2 million Soviet prisoners of war in 1941. German policy provided these prisoners an official ration of 1,490 calories per day. In practice, many received far less. By spring 1942, 2 million Soviet prisoners had died, most from starvation and exposure. German soldiers, watching this mass death, understood what it meant to be on the wrong side of a logistics system that could not feed everyone. By mid-1942, German rations across all fronts had declined from official allocations. The paper rations still looked adequate. The reality was different. At Stalingrad, in September 1942, German soldiers were receiving 1,800 calories per day. By December, encircled forces were down to 100 grams of bread daily, roughly 400 calories total. Soldiers starved while fighting one of the most brutal urban battles in history. Wehrmacht medical officers documented the consequences. Malnutrition did not just cause weight loss, it caused increased susceptibility to disease. Wounds healed slowly. Recovery from illness took longer. Cold weather injuries were more severe and more common. Soldiers became physically unable to perform demanding tasks. Mental acuity declined. Morale collapsed. Starting in 1944, Wehrmacht ration quality declined even when quantities were maintained on paper. Meat and fats were replaced with potatoes and dried vegetables. Bread became increasingly adulterated with sawdust and other fillers. Coffee substitutes became substitutes of substitutes. Anything that could be stretched was stretched. American soldiers, meanwhile, continued eating well. Studies conducted by the United States Army Quartermaster Corps during the war documented actual caloric intake. In garrison, American soldiers consumed 3,400 to 3,800 calories per day. In field training and combat operations, the range was 3,200 to 4,100 calories. These figures were consistent across all theaters. Europe, North Africa, Italy, Pacific Islands, American logistics delivered. The American military treated food as a strategic priority. The Quartermaster Corps employed thousands of personnel focused solely on feeding troops. Supply chains were built to move food alongside ammunition and fuel. Field kitchens were standardized, mobile, and efficient. The M1937 field range could be set up in 30 minutes and feed 150 to 200 men with hot meals twice daily. Ice cream became an official priority. The United States produced 135 million pounds of dehydrated ice cream mix annually by 1943, plus 80 million gallons of fresh ice cream. It was classified as one of the 7 basic foods and distributed to all theaters. The military built ice cream plants on ships. The Navy even constructed floating ice cream barges in the Pacific. This was not frivolity. This was a deliberate policy to maintain morale through abundance. German prisoners of war experienced American food culture firsthand. By war's end, 425,000 German POWs were held in approximately 700 camps across 46 states. Under the Geneva Convention, they received the same rations as American soldiers, approximately 3,200 calories per day, equal to what American troops ate. The results were dramatic. German POWs gained weight in captivity. One prisoner recalled weighing 128 pounds at capture and 185 pounds after 2 years as a POW, gaining 57 pounds. He wrote that he had gotten so fat you could no longer see his eyes. Another prisoner gained similar weight, later stating that the food was so abundant it seemed sinful compared to what German civilians were eating. Historian Arnold Kramer, studying German POWs in America, noted that many prisoners gained substantial weight, which their families immediately noticed upon their return to Germany after the war. Some prisoners were eating better as captives than they had eaten as soldiers in their own army. This fact was not lost on them. Approximately 5,000 German POWs later emigrated to the United States, in part because of their positive experiences during captivity. One documented case was Ernst Floeter, born August 8, 1925 in Stettin. He was drafted into the Wehrmacht and served with the German 91st Division. He was captured by the American 82nd Airborne Division in Normandy in June 1944, 12 days after D-Day. He was 18 years old. Floeter later recalled his first meal in American custody. He could not believe the quantity of food: eggs, bread, real coffee, fruit. He thought there had been a mistake, that this amount was meant for several men, not one individual. American guards assured him it was standard. He wrote in his diary, describing the abundance and waste he witnessed. It was sinful how much food the Americans had, and how much they wasted. Floeter spent the remainder of the war in POW camps, first in England, then in the United States. He was well fed, well treated, and given opportunities to work for wages. After the war, he returned to Germany briefly, then immigrated to the United States, where he lived for over 50 years, dying in Grand Ledge, Michigan in August 2015. He never forgot that first American meal and what it revealed about the vast gap in capability between the two nations. The logistical superiority extended beyond food. American forces had mobility that German forces could not match. The United States produced 2.6 million trucks during the war. Germany produced just over 300,000. American trucks were standardized, making maintenance and spare parts simple. German forces used a hodgepodge of captured vehicles: French, Czech, Polish, British, Italian, in addition to German models. Spare parts were a nightmare. Maintenance was chaotic. American supply doctrine assumed abundance and redundancy. Multiple supply routes, stockpiles at multiple levels. Backup plans for backup plans. The Red Ball Express, the truck convoy system supplying forces after D-Day, moved 12,000 tons of supplies daily at its peak, using over 6,000 trucks, operating 24 hours a day. German supply doctrine assumed scarcity and improvisation. Make do with less. Capture what you need from the enemy. Prioritize ruthlessly. Hope for the best. This worked in short campaigns like Poland and France, where German forces could rely on captured supplies and intact local infrastructure. It failed catastrophically in extended campaigns like Russia and North Africa, where distances were vast, infrastructure was poor or destroyed, and captured supplies were insufficient. By late 1944, German strategic planning explicitly incorporated captured supplies as a necessity, not an option. Operations were designed around the assumption that German forces would seize enemy fuel, ammunition, and food. This was not confidence. This was desperation. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 demonstrated this failure completely. Adolf Hitler assigned 28 million litres of fuel for the Ardennes offensive. Only 14 million litres were actually assembled, enough for roughly one-third to one-half the distance to Antwerp under combat conditions. Field Marshal von Rundstedt's forces started with 6 days of fuel at most. Hitler explicitly stated that German forces would have to rely on capturing Allied fuel dumps during their advance. SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper, commanding one of the spearhead units, knew before he began that he lacked sufficient fuel to reach his objective, the Meuse River. His plan required capturing American supply points along the route. German intelligence had identified the Stavelot fuel depot containing 3 million gallons of gasoline. Kampfgruppe Peiper came within 1,000 feet of it but failed to capture it before American forces destroyed the stocks. By December 19th, day 4 of the offensive, all of General Hasso von Manteuffel's tank units were desperate for fuel. Many ran dry within 4 miles of the Meuse River, their objective clearly visible but unreachable. The offensive collapsed. Lack of fuel was a primary factor. German forces had planned an operation they could not sustain logistically, and had gambled on capturing what they needed from an enemy who fought harder and destroyed their supplies more effectively than German planners anticipated. American forces during the same battle faced logistical challenges but solved them through overwhelming capacity. The American Third Army, under George Patton, pivoted 90 degrees from its axis of advance and moved 3 divisions over 70 miles in 48 hours to counterattack the German penetration. This required moving not just 133,000 soldiers, but all their supplies, fuel, ammunition, and food. American logistics made it happen. German logistics could not have attempted it. The contrast was visible in every theatre of the war. In Italy, American soldiers ate hot meals from field kitchens most days. German soldiers ate cold, rations most days and hot meals when field kitchens could operate, which was increasingly rare. After D-Day in France, American logistics were so effective that some forward units received ice cream delivered by aircraft. German troops in France were eating bread adulterated with sawdust and soup, so thin soldiers joked about seeing through it. In the Pacific, American soldiers complained that sea rations were monotonous. They wanted more variety. Japanese soldiers trapped on isolated islands were eating whatever they could find, including grass, roots, tree bark, and in documented cases, human flesh. Thousands of Japanese soldiers died of starvation on bypassed islands where American forces never needed to fire a shot. By early 1945, the food situation in Germany itself had become catastrophic. The official civilian ration was 1,670 calories per day in winter 1944-45. In practice, with distribution networks collapsing and the black market absorbing much of the available food, actual consumption was often 1,200 to 1,400 calories. In some urban areas experiencing siege conditions, it dropped as low as 800 to 1,000 calories. People starved. Children showed signs of severe malnutrition. The elderly died in large numbers, unable to survive on rations insufficient to maintain body weight. The German government prioritized military rations, but even Wehrmacht forces were suffering. Quality had declined so far that military physical examinations documented ever-increasing malnutrition, starting at the end of 1942 for conscripts born in 1924. By 1944 and early 1945, United States Army medical assessments noted that captured German soldiers showed clear signs of a deficient preventive medicine program and inadequate food allowances. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the food crisis worsened before it improved. With the Nazi government collapsed, no entity coordinated food distribution. American and British occupation forces found German civilians in their zones receiving approximately 1,000 to 1,250 calories per day. General Lucius Clay, the American military governor, stated bluntly in August 1945, "There is no choice between being a communist on 1,500 calories a day and a believer in democracy on 1,000 calories." American occupation policy, initially codified in Directive JCS 1067, was deliberately harsh. Germany was to be prevented from economic recovery. Food imports were restricted. German civilians were not to be fed better than the worst-off populations in Allied nations. American soldiers were under strict orders not to share their rations with Germans. These orders extended to soldiers' wives when they arrived later. Food was to be destroyed rather than given to Germans, though individual soldiers frequently ignored these orders when confronted with starving children. The policy changed in 1947. Directive JCS 1779 replaced the punitive approach, noting that an orderly, prosperous Europe required the economic contributions of a stable and productive Germany. Food aid increased. The Marshall Plan, beginning in 1948, shipped millions of tons of food to Europe, including Germany. American agricultural abundance, the same abundance that had fed American soldiers so well during the war, now fed the defeated enemy back to health. The irony was not lost on anyone. The United States had demonstrated during the war that it could feed its own military 3,500 calories per day while projecting that capability across oceans to multiple continents simultaneously. After the war, the United States demonstrated it could feed much of Europe, including former enemies, preventing mass starvation while rebuilding entire economies. This was power of a kind that few nations in history had possessed. The calorie gap was never officially acknowledged during the war. Nazi propaganda never admitted German soldiers were starving while American soldiers ate ice cream. But soldiers knew. Every German soldier who captured American supplies knew. Every prisoner who ate in American camps knew. Veterans returning from every front knew. The knowledge spread through the civilian population despite censorship. After the war, military historians and analysts studied the role of logistics in Germany's defeat. Their conclusions were unanimous. Germany faced many disadvantages: Soviet manpower, American industrial production, British determination. But underlying all of them was a fundamental logistical inadequacy. Germany could not feed its military adequately across multiple fronts for an extended war. Therefore, Germany could not sustain the war effort. Therefore, Germany lost. The numbers, compiled from Quartermaster Corps records and Wehrmacht documents, tell the story with brutal clarity. In 1943, an American soldier ate approximately 3,500 calories per day. A German soldier ate approximately 1,500 to 1,800 calories per day, sometimes less. Over weeks, this gap manifested as weight loss and fatigue. Over months, it became malnutrition and increased disease. Over years, it meant an army that could not sustain combat operations effectively against an enemy that was well-fed, well-supplied, and growing stronger while Germany grew weaker. The Americans were not just outproducing Germany in tanks, planes, and ships, though they were doing that too. They were outfeeding Germany in calories, nutrients, and basic sustainment. In a war of attrition, this mattered as much as any weapon system. Possibly more. The fundamental lesson was clear and remains clear today. Modern warfare is decided by logistics. An army marches on its stomach, as Napoleon allegedly said, "Feed your soldiers well and they can fight effectively." Starve your soldiers and they will lose, regardless of courage, training, or tactical skill. This is not abstract military theory. This is historical fact, documented in millions of ration reports, medical records, and after-action analyses from all sides of the conflict. The United States understood this. American military doctrine treated logistics as a core competency, not an afterthought. Supply chains were built in parallel with combat units. Food, fuel, and ammunition were moved together, planned together, prioritized together. Field kitchens, mobile bakeries, and refrigeration units were standard equipment. The attitude was that well-fed soldiers fight better, so feeding them well was a tactical advantage worth the investment. Germany never fully grasped this, or grasped it too late. German military doctrine emphasized will, discipline, and offensive spirit. Logistics was seen as an administrative function, not a combat multiplier. The assumption was that German soldiers were tough enough to fight effectively on less food, less fuel, and fewer supplies than enemies who were supposedly soft and dependent on material comfort. This assumption was tested on the Eastern Front, in North Africa, and in Western Europe. It failed in every case. The German military was not poorly led. German tactical doctrine was often superior to Allied doctrine. German soldiers were well trained and often courageous. German weapons, particularly tanks and machine guns, were frequently better than Allied equivalents. None of it mattered because the German military could not be sustained logistically for the war it was fighting. That is the story of the calorie gap. It is a story about logistics, supply chains, and industrial capacity. It is about the unglamorous side of war, the part that does not appear in propaganda films or heroic narratives, but it is the part that determines outcomes. Farmers growing wheat, factory workers canning meat, merchant mariners shipping supplies across oceans, truck drivers moving food forward under fire, quartermasters calculating requirements, cooks preparing meals in field kitchens. All the people and systems that ensure soldiers eat. The Americans did this superbly. They built a logistical system that could feed millions of soldiers on multiple continents simultaneously, maintaining caloric intake at levels that kept soldiers healthy, strong, and capable of sustained operations. German soldiers, by contrast, grew progressively weaker, hungrier, and less capable as the war continued. This was not an accident. It was the inevitable result of logistical systems operating at vastly different scales, with vastly different capabilities. When German forces captured that American supply depot at Feriana on February 17, 1943, they were looking at physical evidence of this gap: mountains of food, K-rations, providing 2,830 calories as emergency rations, field rations providing 3,500 to 4,100 calories when field kitchens operated, real coffee, real chocolate, real meat, real eggs, all shipped thousands of miles across an ocean to feed soldiers fighting in a North African desert. Some German officers, looking at those supplies, understood immediately what it meant. America possessed logistical capability that Germany could not match. America could project power not just in terms of tanks and aircraft, but in terms of food and fuel and every other supply a modern military needed. America was not just fighting Germany. America was burying Germany under an avalanche of material that German industry could not produce, and German logistics could not distribute even if it could be produced. That realization, in February 1943, meant the war was effectively over. It would take 2 more years and millions more casualties to make it official. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. The side that could feed its soldiers 3,500 calories per day while fighting on multiple continents was going to defeat the side that could barely feed its soldiers 1,500 calories per day while fighting on those same continents. The lesson remains relevant. Wars are still decided by logistics. Soldiers still need to eat. Modern militaries still depend on supply chains that can deliver food, fuel, ammunition, and spare parts to wherever forces are deployed. The technology has changed, but the fundamental truth has not. Feed your soldiers adequately and sustain your forces logistically, or lose. It is that simple. It was true in 1943. It is true today. It will remain true as long as wars are fought by human beings who need to eat.